Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Sukkah Daf contains no less than 3 Mishnayos. First two very brief with a brief comment of the Gemara, and the third much lengthier with a longer Gemara. The first Mishnah is discussing the mitzvah of saying the complete Hallel and Simchas Yom Tov, whether they apply to Shmini Atzeres. The second Mishnah discusses when Sukkot is ending, when can you take the Sukkah apart, and when can you show, or how could you show that you're not using the Sukkah anymore. And the third discusses the mitzvah of Nisa Chamayim, pouring water on the Mizbeach, and describes the procedure, how it was drawn. So let's begin the daf. The first Mishnah says that, as we'd seen in our previous Mishnah, the mitzvah of saying Hallel all the days of Sukkot also applies on Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres you also say full Hallel, and also the mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov also applies on Shmini Atzeres, and not just on the 7 days of Sukkot, also Shmini Atzeres. The Gemara wants to know, how do you know? The Torah, when it says V'samachta b'chagecha, only says it by Sukkot. It says you should have Simcha. Only says it by Sukkot. Doesn't say anything about Shmini Atzeres. We discussed in a previous daf. Shmini Atzeres is a different Yom Tov. The Gemara quotes a brisa that says the Torah, when it says discussing the mitzvah of Sukkot, says V'samachta b'chagecha v'ha'isa ach sameach, and you should be only happy. So that's an extra inclusory phrase, and that includes that there's a mitzvah on the last. That there's a mitzvah on the night of the last day, meaning Shmini Atzeres by night. Now, the Gemara assumes the following thing. The Gemara assumes that the main mitzvah of Simcha is during the day, each Yom Tov, during the meal of the day. That there's a mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov by night is an extra chiddush. So says the Gemara, you're telling me that the mitzvah is the night of Shmini Atzeres. And Rashi explains, so Kal V'chomer is the night of Shmini Atzeres. Certainly, there's a mitzvah by the day of Shmini Atzeres. Says the Gemara, how do you know that the extra word V'samachta v'ha'isach sameach is to tell me that there's a mitzvah of Simcha on the night of Shmini Atzeres, and therefore also the day? Maybe it's talking about the night of Sukkot, the Sukkot nights. To teach me that there's a mitzvah there also. If it would have only said V'samachta b'chagacha, it would refer to the days. Now it's telling me also the night. So the Gemara says no, because it says ach. Ach is a exclusory phrase. That's to tell me that there is no mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov, the nights of Sukkot. So how do you know that you're including the night of Shmini Atzeres and you're excluding the first night of Yom Tov? Maybe the other way around. Maybe you're including the night of Sukkot and you're excluding the night of Shmini Atzeres. So Gemara says no, it can't be, because if we're going to include something, we want to include the night which is following a day that has a Simcha. The first night of Sukkot doesn't have any Simcha right before it. The time period right before it is Erev Yom Tov. There's no mitzvah of Simcha there. There's no meat there. But Shmini Atzeres is coming right after the day, the last day of Sukkot. There's a mitzvah of Simcha there, and therefore there's a mitzvah of Simcha on Shmini Atzeres night as well, and Kal V'chomer on the Yom Tov of Shmini Atzeres itself. Okay, next Mishnah. When do you take the Sukkah apart? How do you end the Sukkot mitzvah? So the Mishnah says that when you finish eating the last meal, you should not take the Sukkah apart, you should leave it standing. But in order to prepare for the kavod of Shmini Atzeres, you should move the furniture down from the Sukkah, which was in the days of Chazal usually on the roof. You should move it down into your house so you could have your furniture in the house to be able to eat the Shmini Atzeres meal indoors. So the Gemara asks, what if you don't have any furniture? The Gemara says, you don't have any furniture, then what did you do? How did you sit in the Sukkah? The Gemara says, no, I mean, if you didn't have any place to move your furniture down out of the roof. So you can't do that. So what do you do to show that you're not using the Sukkah anymore? What do you do l'chvod the Yom Tov of Shmini Atzeres to show that this is a different Yom Tov and now you're not going to be using the Sukkah anymore? So Gemara gives two options. Option one is you passel the Sukkah by removing a 4 tefach span of schach. Option two is you bring a candle into the Sukkah. We've seen the halacha earlier, you're not allowed to have a candle in the Sukkah. So Gemara says it's not a contradiction, it's two different places. In Chutz La'aretz, where you're going to be sitting in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, you just want to show that it's not a real mitzvah of Sukkah, you put the candle in. But you can't passel it because it's a suffix, 7th day of Sukkot, and therefore you have to actually sit in it. Now, in Eretz Yisrael, where it's definitely not Sukkot, because Sukkot, we don't have Sveika D'Yoma, Sukkot ends, and now we start a new Yom Tov of Shmini Atzeres, there you could passel it, and you could take it away. So we're just asked, how does candle help if you have a big Sukkah? We know that candle is only a problem if you have a small Sukkah, like we've seen earlier in the Masechta. Someone says, you're right, so candle wouldn't help there, so you have to bring in your pots and pans, because that's something you don't bring into a Sukkah, and that shows that it's not a Sukkah. We now begin the last mission of the Daf, which describes the Nisa Chamayim, pouring of water on the Mizbeach, wine was poured on the Mizbeach all the time as part of the Avodah. On Sukkot there was water. So the Gemara says that the Mishnah describes the performance as follows. They had a container of for the water, which was made from gold. The container held 3 lugan according to the Chachamim. It was 1 lug according to Rabbi Yehuda, and they filled it up from the Shiloach. Shiloach is a pool of water which is fed by a spring just outside Yerushalayim. When they filled it up and then they brought it back, they entered through the Shar Hamayim, was called the gate of water because this is what it was. Because of this activity, and when they entered the gate, they blew shofar, tkiya through a tkiya out of joy, like the Torah says. You should do this water drawing b'simcha, shaftem mayim b'sason. It says. And then they approached and came into the Azara. They approached the Mizbeach, went up the ramp which is on the south, and immediately turned to the left. Usually you turn to the right. Here turned to the left, and the reason is because the place that they need to be poured was in the southwest corner, so he turned to the west. The Gemara in Zvachim learns out of Psukim that they turned to the left. Okay, now there were 2 bowls there, and each bowl had a hole in the bottom of it. The 2 bowls, machlokas, that they were made out of, according to the Tanakama, they were made out of silver. According to Rabbi Yehuda, they were made out of lime, but they are called silver because they looked silver, because they were blackened by the wine that was poured into it. Sid is much whiter than silver, and silver is blacker than it, and therefore they were called the silver bowls. Now, so they had the holes in it. So one was for wine, one was for water. The Mishnah describes that it looks like 2 nostrils because you had 2 bowls, each with a hole in it. Now, the one on the east was the one for the wine. That had a wider hole so that it could pour down at the same speed as the water because wine is thicker than water. Now, they poured into both of them at the same time. The bigger hole allowed the wine to go down at the same time as the water, and they both finished pouring at the same time so that both of them would have concluded ending at the same time because the size of the hole was the same. Now, Rav Yehuda does another thing that he argues about. He says that they did in Nisach Hamayim even on Shmini Atzeres, which the Chachamim disagree with. Now the Mishnah continues. It says that they told the person who was doing the Nisach Hamayim, lift up your hand so we can see clearly what you're doing. You want to see that you're pouring it into the bowl on the Mizbeach properly. Now the hole went down through the Mizbeach into the ground deep below the Mizbeach in what's called a Shitin. There was one time where the person who was pouring it was a Tzeduki, and he poured it on his feet. Tzedukim don't hold of Nisach Hamayim, and the entire congregation stoned him with their esrogim. Now, this is the same on Shabbos and during the week, except on Shabbos they didn't bring water on Shabbos. They brought the water during the week on Friday. The problem is that you can't leave water in a Kli Shares overnight because anything that's left overnight in a Kli Shares, it's mekudesh as soon as it's in the Kli Shares, and anything that's mekudesh gets puzzle overnight. So they put it in a big golden barrel that was not Kli Shares. It was not mekudesh with kedushas Kli Shares, and therefore it didn't become mekudesh yet until they put it in the smaller flask, and didn't become puzzle overnight. However, if it got spilled or if it got uncovered, then they had to draw more water, and they drew from the kior and used that water. The kior water did not become puzzle overnight because it was lowered into a well every night so that it would be connected to the well water and would not get a psul. The reason they had to draw more water if it became uncovered is because uncovered water that was left uncovered, is puzzle to go on the Mizbeach. The Gemara now begins and records an interesting conversation between 2 apikorasim. First of all, it says, what's the source that you're supposed to blow shofar b'simcha when you're bringing in the water? So it's from the pasuk that says, "Shafta mayim b'sasayin." You should draw water with joy. So the Gemara says there were 2 mini. Min is usually an apikoros, a heretic. One was called Sason and one was called Simcha. Those were the names, Sason and Simcha. So Sason said to Simcha, "I'm better than you," like the Torah says. Sason was Simcha Yasigu. You see, I'm first. So Simcha said back, "I'm better than you," like it says Simcha v'Sason laYehudim. So Simcha comes first. So Sason said to Simcha, "One day they're going to get rid of you and make you into the guy who runs in front of them to clear the way." Like it says, "Ki v'Simcha seitzeyu," they'll go out with Simcha. So you're going to be the runner in front of everybody. So Simcha said to Sason, "One day they're going to take you and fill you up with water, because it says Shafta mayim b'Sason, they will draw water in Sason." Now, Sason then went to Rabbi Avo and he said, "One day you're going to draw water for me." Like it says, Shaftamayim b'sasin, you'll draw water for sasan. So Rabbi Yehuda said, it doesn't say lisasan, it doesn't say for sasan, it says in sasan, b'sasan. We're going to make you into a flask and fill you up with water. That's what we're going to do with you. Now the Gemara proceeds to analyze the Mishnah phrase by phrase. The first thing is, we had said that the Kohen who's bringing the water up on the Mizbeach turns to the left. The Gemara brings a brayso that says usually you turn to the right. Everything you need to do on the Mizbeach, besides for three things, you always turn to the right. In Gemara and Zvach, we learn it out of Psukim. You should always turn to the right, so you turn right, and therefore you're going around the Mizbeach in a counterclockwise fashion until you get off. You never turn around to go off the Mizbeach, you keep going all the way around until you get back to the ramp, and there you go down. What are the three things that you turn to the left? Those are three things that have to be done in the close left corner, the southwest corner, that may get ruined by the smoke of the Mizbeach if you go all the way around. They are the Nisach HaMayim, like we said here, the pouring of the water. Nisach HaYayin is pouring wine by any carbon, and Oila Sa'if if there are too many. Usually the carbon Oila Oif is done in the southeast corner, which is to the right of the ramp. And that's because it's right near the spot where they would throw the pieces, the Makom Hadeshin, which is to the right of the ramp. But if there were too many Karbanos, Olas, Ov going on, there was no room in the eastern corner, they would do it in the western corner. In that case, they would turn left. Now, if they turn left, they turned right around when they finished and went down the ramp right there. They didn't go all the way around the ramp the wrong way. They didn't go all the way around the Mizbeach the wrong way. Okay, next thing the Mishnah had said was that the bowls were blackened by the wine. The Gemara says, why should the bowl that is set aside just for water, why should that be blackened if there's no wine in there? So the Gemara says the halacha is, as the Mishnah mentions, that if they switched and they put the wine in the water bowl and the water in the wine bowl, it's kosher. Therefore, sometimes it happened, and therefore they put wine sometimes in each of the bowls and it was blackened. Okay, next we'd seen that there were two holes, and we'd seen that one hole was wider than the other. So the Gemara wants to say that this Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, there was less wine than water. Wine is always 3 lug, and Rabbi Yehuda holds that the water was only 1 lug. So that's why one hole had to be wider than the other so they could finish at the same time. The Gemara says, no, it's the Rabbanon. It's not Rabbi Yehuda, and the reason why one had to be wider, even though they're both the same amount, both of them are 3 lugan according to the Rabbanan. The wine and the water was 3 lugan, is because since wine is thicker, it goes down slower. You have to have a bigger hole. The Gemara says, I'll prove to you that it has to be that it is the Rabbanan, not Rabbi Yehuda, because the language of the Mishnah is that one hole was av and one hole was dak. One hole was thick and one hole was thin. That's not Rabbi Yehuda's language. When he says it, he says one hole was wide and one hole was narrow. Therefore, this is a Rabbanon language, and that's how we know that this is the Rabbanon.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.